Hello, it's Jim Hutchins for the Jerusalem Connection Truth Report for this week. We're in the book of Romans 9 through 11, the definitive statement on the part of God with regard to the Jews and Israel. And we're doing this, we're focusing on this to counteract the claims of the Palestinians and those who support the Palestinians that they have a right to the land because they've lived there a long time. They refuse to recognize the covenant promises of God are as valid today as the day that they were given. We're in Romans 11, critical passage. It becomes very poignant at this point. We've taken a look last week at the remnant. There will only be a remnant of Jews who are saved, who will come to a full acceptance and acknowledgement of Yeshua, of Jesus as the Messiah. But then Paul says this in chapter 11, verse 7. He says, what then? What Israel sought so earnestly, it did not obtain. It sought it earnestly through works, by keeping the law of Moses, keeping kosher, keeping the feasts and the festivals, and keeping the Sabbath, that they should somehow work their way to heaven and be acceptable on the basis of the works. He's answering that charge. What Israel sought so earnestly, it did not obtain, but the elect did. The others were hardened, and Paul has identified him as a part of the remnant, of the elect. And those who believe in Jesus, those who acknowledge Jesus, are a part of that elect remnant. Then he says, as it is written, and this is a statement by Moses. This is a very critical statement, because it's as true today as the day it was given, as he says here. Moses says in Deuteronomy chapter 29, God gave them, that is the Jews, a spirit of stupor. God gave them a spirit of stupor. It's God-given. Eyes so that they could not see, ears so that they could not hear, to this very day. That's the proclamation. That's the evaluation of Jews today. God has given them a stupor. There's a veil. They can't see it. That veil will be removed at some point, and a remnant, a huge remnant, will come to faith. He goes on to say, and David says, verse 9, and may their table become a snare and a trap, a stumbling block and a retribution for them. May their eyes be darkened so that they cannot see, and their backs be bent forever. Statement, may their table become a snare and a trap. I think that must refer to the kosher laws that have been so elevated. Jew, it's become almost an idol. It's an all-consuming experience that they keep kosher. Now, I believe that the laws of God were given to us for our best interest, and He tells us what are the clean and unclean animals and so on. And it's not God sitting up in heaven says, okay, this is good for you, and this is not because I'm God and I say so, and that's it. No, He gives us these laws in our best interests. There are certain foods that are more healthy for us than others. But the conclusion of which they have elevated this to the point where it's become necessary for their salvation. I want to conclude our time together today by referring to the covenant that God made with Israel. Just like the statement by Moses to this very day, this covenant is as valid today as the day it was given. And I think that's very important, because there are those who say, because Israel and the Jewish people are not in a covenant relationship with God, they do not deserve the land. They do not require it. But listen to this. This covenant was given and spelled out to us in Genesis chapter 15. And it says this, as the sun was setting, Genesis chapter 15, verse 12, as the sun was setting, Abraham fell into a deep sleep, and a thick and dreadful darkness came over him. Now notice this, God is making a covenant with Abraham. Abraham is not responding by making a promise or a covenant with God. Abraham is asleep. So the one who is committed and obligated to keep the covenant is God, not Abraham or his descendants. And that is very significant. That is very significant. This is an unconditional covenant on the part of God to Abraham and his descendants. In verse 18 it says, on that day God made a covenant with Abraham. Not Abraham with God. God made a covenant with Abraham and said, to your descendants I give this land from the river of Egypt to the great river Euphrates. Now that is as valid today as the day that it was given. And it's spelled out more in chapter 17, verse 7, where God says, I will establish my covenant as an everlasting covenant. It doesn't end. It never ceases. It's ongoing. It's valid today. I'll bring an everlasting covenant between me and your descendants, between me and you and your descendants after you for the generation be your God and the God of your descendants. I'll give an everlasting possession to the land, and you and your descendants after you, and I'll be your God. Now that's the situation. Israel has been disobedient. They've been kicked out of the land. They've been regathered now in 1948. They've become a nation. God has brought them back in a profane state. Their spiritual renewal awaits them. And we praise God for that. But I think it's important. It's very important to understand that the covenant that God made, He obligated Himself. And it's not Abraham or his descendants who are obligated. But God is going to fulfill His covenant promises to God, including the land. And I love the way that Paul tells Timothy in 2 Timothy chapter 2, if we are faithless, if the Jews are faithless without faith, He will remain faithful, for He cannot deny Himself. God remains faithful to His promises, His covenant promises for everlasting.